Hello and welcome. You're watching Global Mirror. I'm Shreya Upadhyaya. It has been a week of major international developments which would have larger implications on the changing geopolitical landscape of the world. On the show today, we get you all the major global happenings, starting with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic visit to Ukraine and Poland. In an unprecedented visit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Ukraine and Poland in a bid to strengthen India's ties with Central and Eastern Europe. In Ukraine, the Prime Minister met with President Volodymyr Zelensky in capital Kyiv. The visit came after the Indian PM met with Russia's President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. In both the countries, Prime Minister Modi led the voice of the global south, reiterating that solutions are not found on battlefields. Now, there was hug diplomacy and talks in Kyiv, but the visit was much more than just symbolism. Before I go to my guests, take a look at this report. With a message of peace, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Ukraine over a month after he met Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. The visit, a first for an Indian Prime Minister since Ukraine became an independent nation in 1991, was expectedly high on symbolism and messaging to the world. The message of strategic, independent foreign policy, a tightrope that India has been walking since the war began in 2022. As PM Modi and President Zelensky held a 3-hour-long bilateral meeting, the visit was much more than portraiture. The Russia-Ukraine war dominated the talks, with PM Modi stating that India has never been neutral in this war. It was, from day one, on a side.
India will play this role. I think that India began to recognize that this is not just conflict, this real war of one man, and his name is Putin, against whole country, which name is Ukraine. And you're a big country, you have big influence, and you can stop Putin, and you can stop and hold his economy and put him really on his place. And his place, you know where is his place. Bye-bye.
हमने जो दूसरा मार्ग चुना, वो दूसरा मार्ग है युद्ध से दूर रहने का। हम बहुत ही कन्विक्शन के साथ युद्ध से दूर रहे हैं, लेकिन इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि हम तटस्थ थे। हम न्यूट्रल नहीं थे। हम पहले दिन से ही पक्षकार रहे हैं और हमारा पक्ष है शांति का। हम बुद्ध की धरती से आते हैं, जहां युद्ध को कोई स्थान नहीं होता है। हम महात्मा गांधी की धरती से आते हैं, जिसने पूरे विश्व को शांति का संदेश दिया है।
Leading the voice of Global South, PM Modi stressed that the region, particularly India, is ready to assist in every humanitarian way in finding a peaceful solution. Beyond this, 4 agreements were signed between India and Ukraine in sectors of humanitarian aid, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and cultural exchange. India also handed over the Bharat Health Initiative for Sahyog Hit and Maitri, or Bhishma medical facility, developed indigenously. The visit came after PM Modi's Russia visit was criticized by the West as well as Zelensky himself. In fact, in a sharp retort, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar had this to say when asked about the Modi-Putin hug.
You know, in our part of the world, when people meet people, they are given to embracing each other. May not be part of your culture, but I assure you it's part of ours.
As India pushes for stronger ties with Eastern Europe while maintaining its independent ties with Russia, the question remains, who is deciding which way the world order will go? Bureau Report, Mirror Now. All right, to talk more about this on the broadcast, I'm joined by Ukrainian MP Vadym Halaichuk. I'm also joined by Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at the MP IDSC. Good evening and namaskar to both of you. Welcome to Mirror Now. Vadym, let me start with you. The fact that this is an unprecedented first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine, the fact that it comes a day ahead of your Independence Day, and the fact that the Prime Minister of India has reiterated the voice of the global South, saying that this is not an era of war and that solutions will not be found on battlefield. How does Ukraine see this visit of the Prime Minister, and how do you see India's role going forward?
Thank you for having me. We were expecting this visit because of the symbolism. First of all, the visit comes at a very important moment. The visit comes, as you pointed out correctly, in the days of Ukraine celebrating its independence, reiterating the reasons why we fight this war. This is our war of independence. Therefore, it was important for us that Honorable Prime Minister Modi had chosen this day, this date for the visit.
Like this.
It was also expected that the position that India has taken, and Prime Minister Modi himself reiterated back in fall of 2022 when he told President Putin that this is not an era of war, indicating that India will support diplomatic track. We were awaiting further steps and further proposals on what sort of instruments could be used, given India's position, especially as the definitely leader of the global South, of the region, definitely the world leading, the biggest in the world democracy, and given its experience. India has been neutral. India has been instrumental in different conflicts around the world by offering its expertise and its ability to speak to different parties. Therefore, the visit, though pretty short, I must say, has been successful from what I see and from what I hear in the local media, from people who have attended the meetings, from those experts and analysts the media had reported, and what documents were assigned to report that this can definitely be judged as a very important, successful visit to stress importance of cooperation in reaching to diplomatic solutions when the time and the circumstances allow, to deepen the cooperation that India and Ukraine have. There's a lot we can do in the agricultural sphere, in the actually in the military production
Vadym, I'll come back to this in a bit.
Education,
but let me
culture,
also
so
bring in
on, so
Dr. Swasti Rao into this discussion. Yeah, let me get in Dr. Swasti Rao into this discussion. Dr. Swasti, for India, it's been a crucial visit. And we've talked about the war. The Prime Minister, in fact, said that he shares the concerns of the global South with the Ukrainian president. And he's also reiterated the fact that, this is not an era of war. But just the fact that this entire visit also reflects India's strategic autonomy, its neutrality, so to say, which the Prime Minister said that we're not being neutral, we've been on the side of peace. But clearly, it's been, a successful diplomatic tightrope that India has been walking since 2022 and still sustains it.
Very good evening to you, Shreya, and a good evening to Mr. Vadym Halaichuk. I'm sure it must be a tiring day for him as well as it is for the rest of us here. Well, yes, so a couple of things. First thing is about India's neutrality. I think if you heard the Prime Minister speak to President Zelensky in Hindi and with a very earnest sincerity on his face when he said that India's never been neutral. Okay, I think I would like to sort of highlight it somewhere, Shreya, that I think India's neutrality has never been understood or discussed, even in India, even by us, let alone by all the misunderstanding that we talk about abroad. So I think that India's neutrality, if you wish to call that, it is not an passive neutrality. It is an active and evolving neutrality, which in my opinion is resilient, it is responsible, and it is open to reset and readjustments, because the end goal is peace, So we are neutral for what? We are neutral not for neutrality's sake. We are neutral because we want to be, we are starting by peace. So, and what we saw today was a very good example of that. When when Prime Minister Modi identified with the Ukraine pain and loss at the Children's Memorial, I'm sure those were visuals that were tweeted and posted again and again by the Prime Minister's office and by MEA. One could see that India is not a passive or a disinterested player. So I think that this one thing, by going to Ukraine, by making this effort, traveling 10 hours by train with this high power delegation, I think what India has successfully established is that there is a need to relook at India's active neutrality, which is the need of the hour if you really want to bridge this gap between Russia and Ukraine or Russia and the West. So that's the first thing. And very quickly, the other thing, Shreya, is that, of course, it's a successful visit because it is unprecedented. Nobody really expected it 2 months ago. In fact, even a month ago. Last month, I was in Poland and nobody expected either a Poland visit or a Ukraine visit. And then we had, both of them. So what I'm saying is that, yes, it is successful. If you look at the tip of the iceberg, of course, you would see there are some 4 symbolic agreements signed. But let me also reiterate the fact that this particular visit is not just about balancing or strategic signaling or a relay of messaging, which is obviously there. That's, of course, one of the most important reasons. But please, let's take a few moments to acknowledge that Ukraine is also very important for India's own national interests, because I think Vadim is making that point that not many people know that the military industrial cooperation between India and Ukraine actually is very old. I mean, we keep talking about precisely the defense cooperation, and there are 3 main Ukrainian companies. One is Zoria, one is Motorsich, and one is the Antonov Design Bureau, which are basically the companies from where we get our turbine engines for all our frontline warships of the Navy. We also get the engines for our aircraft, including the Russian helicopters, etc., especially of the older generation. And these things without which we cannot do. So basically what I'm trying to say is that, yes, there is strategic signaling and balancing and all of that, and neutrality and bringing the war to an end. That is one vertical. The other vertical is it is India's interest to have a bilateral, independent approach and ties with Ukraine. And this is what you see in somewhere the quintessence of the statement as well, which is pretty comprehensive, considering that it's the first one. Yeah.
Vadim, I'd also like to ask you about, how Dr. Swasti said that a month back, nobody expected this historic visit to happen by the Indian Prime Minister, but it has happened. And many would say this is coming after the Prime Minister met with President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin, and there were voices from the West as from Ukraine that it wasn't very appreciated. But for countries like India, who want to take the side of peace, who don't want to take one side in this entire conflict and focus on talks and diplomacy in peace, how does one move forward? How does one go about without so to say, angering one of the parties involved in this conflict?
I had the pleasure of discussing these issues with Dr. Swati and at one of the events that we organized between Ukrainian and Indian experts, and we all agreed that about the symbolism of the visit, about the consequences of the visit, and the reasons for it. Definitely, it did not go unnoticed that during the visit to Moscow, Prime Minister Modi was also hugging Mr. Putin, was also very friendly. And then the news appeared about the Russia's vicious attack, which deliberately targeted a children's hospital here in Kyiv, killing a lot of people on that day, civilians in Kyiv. However, we did agree that definitely it wasn't known to Indian government, in delegation, Prime Minister Modi himself, that plans were to do what Russians did on that day. Therefore, we expected that there should be some sort of response. So we do see this visit as this response to emphasize that India is aligned with democracies in the world, is aligned with those countries who do seek diplomatic solutions, who do seek ways to return to rules-based order, which upholds the UN Charter, which respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of different states. Therefore, this was the main
Sure.
the main message that we, prior to the visit,
Okay.
and also during the visit, and I'm sure that will be for days, we will be discussing this. We will have a chance to speak to people who have participated in the negotiations and detailed analysis of the documents which have been signed and the preparations for example, for the next government-to-government meeting, which should take place in India now, is definitely going to include those agreements, those intentions, which I'm sure were discussed, but maybe not even mentioned so far. And given the fact that Prime Minister also visited Poland, we understand that this is not only about Ukraine, this is about Europe. This is about the European Union. This is about India's position towards building relationships with the European Union as the whole, and Ukraine as the candidate country.
Yes, it is of course, Vadym, indeed,
of these connections.
a push by India and India's leadership to have stronger relationship with Central and Eastern Europe. We've had trade ties with Western Europe, but now is the time that we're focusing and strengthening our relationship with Central and Eastern Europe. But Dr. Swasti Rao, it's interesting that, of course, beyond the war, there were agreements in agriculture for both both the economies, which are largely agrarian. There were deals in pharmaceuticals, in humanitarian aid, and, of course, cultural exchange. But one of the things that I want to talk about is also how Dr. Jaishankar responded to one of the reporters during that media interaction where there was a question about Prime Minister Modi hugging President Putin. And he said, it's not part of your culture, but it is part of our culture. And that has been probably, the most independent and strategic line that you can have in this war, that's how we go about it. You go your way, we go our way, and we sort of, have a third way, have a middle way where we can all find peace.
So, well, Shreya, I mean, what do I say about Dr. Jaishankar? He's the king of such one-liners, and he's famous for that, right? I mean, of course, we are from India, and we know, and not just in India, but also abroad, he has quite a cult following for that talent that he has, which is that he's very, very, he can be very cheeky, he's very intelligent, and he's very learned, and then that can be intimidating sometimes. Anyway, so coming back to what you wanted to indicate at with respect to strategic autonomy, well, of course, I mean, one of the ways in which I have been sort of describing this entire diplomatic, so to say, jockeying that India has been up to in the last 1 week is that this is this dehyphenation that we require, which is that for the longest time, yes, it was true that especially after the war in Ukraine began, we often analyze the war. And when I say we, I mean the majority of, for example, the strategic community, okay? I don't mean everybody, and I'm not here getting personal, okay? I'm just saying the majority of the analyses that you saw coming from India, it was basically, we applied the India-Russia bilateral ties to understand what is happening in Ukraine. And I don't think that really was a very sustainable strategy.
Yeah.
Why? Because it also gave India a kind of an image of being more tilted towards one side, whereas India's diplomatic currency was continuously getting invested in trying to project itself as a genuine mediator, which is committed to peace, etc., etc. So what we really required, and I think it was already underway, but Prime Minister's visit has kind of brought it to the foreground, which is this dehyphenation that India's ties with Russia stand on their own, and India's ties with Ukraine can also stand on their own. Why is it important? I already mentioned one is to do with, of course, all the mediation efforts and all the investment and all the humanitarian action that India has taken, very consistently, for Ukraine, which kind of had gotten a little hidden, especially when everybody was only looking at it from India-Russia bilateral ties. So that was one part that had to be fixed. And the other thing, like I said, was the national interest with Ukraine. India has certain national interest. And the third part is that this So this dehyphenation also enables India to play a more substantive, a more visible, and a more lasting role in the stabilization of the European theatre. Because just now you mentioned Central East
But
European
can I
and
quickly ask you then, Dr.
yeah,
Swasti Rao, and my last question before I wrap this discussion up, the
yeah.
dehyphenation that you talk about, how long can countries like India sustain it? How long can we go about it when we know that reminiscences of the post-Cold War era are still being seen in the kind of blocks that are now emerging out of this conflict?
Well, very quickly, my answer to that is very simple, which has been actually the Indian official position as well, Shreya. If you've been noticing it carefully, which is that India does not believe in the worldview of alliances. India doesn't have that worldview. India believes in collaborative frameworks. So, and India would always keep its room for maneuver, open to multi-align as much as possible. So this is basically what you see happening right now. Dehyphenation does not mean that India is disassociating itself. Dehyphenation only means that there's a recognition that there are these bilateral ties that should stand on their own, because
Okay.
there is some national interest that has been served by pursuing it in a more bilateral fashion. So this is what I think this means, and this is completely in sync with India's strategic autonomy. Okay, so you see basically an expression, a dynamism of
Absolutely.
India's strategic autonomy at play, especially in the European theatre.
All right, we'll leave it there. Of course, the Prime Minister has invited President Zelensky here to India as well. And when that visit happens, hopefully it's going to strengthen the relationship even more. And of course, we have that interministerial government commission also being set up. We'll see a meeting at the end of the year. Hopefully that will also have concrete actions being taken in this entire relationship. But we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Vadym Halaichuk and Dr. Swasti Rao, for joining us tonight and sharing your perspective on this entire unprecedented visit.